Hello, I'm Sean Schaefer, Market Segment Manager for Makino, and welcome to our Auburn Hills Tech Center. Today, Cara Walton of Harbour Results is going to present how the economy is rebounding for manufacturing post-COVID, as well as what the future looks like. Cara has been at Harbour Results for 5 years, and she studies economic and business trends in the manufacturing industry. And she's constantly out in the field talking to customers and staying engaged with them and what the current things are happening. So at this point, Cara?
Thank you for that, Sean, and good afternoon, everybody. As he said, I'm one of the directors here at Harbour Results. I specifically work and oversee Harbour IQ, which is our database side of the business. Harbour Results overall, for those of you who aren't familiar, is a manufacturing and consulting firm. So our goal every single day is to make North American manufacturing better. As Sean said, one of the key ways we believe that we have to do that is by making sure we're aware of all these macro forces that occur and benchmarking all of ourselves in the industry and understand how we're doing today and how we can do better in the future. That's where myself and my team comes into play on the Harbour IQ side, where we benchmark everybody from tool suppliers to plastics processors to stampers to die casters to machine shops. And then we also better understand these macro trends and how they're affecting your businesses. So what I'm going to spend some time doing this morning is specifically talking to you about the economy as we go into this new year, and in some cases a post-COVID situation, although not all, and how the economy specifically affects manufacturing. So I spend most of my days in tool shops and in production facilities, so I'm not sitting behind a computer just studying the economy. I'm specifically understanding what happens in the economy and the tariff and trade environment, and with all these other macro forces like supply chain challenges, and better understanding how those affect your businesses day in and day out. So with that, I'm going to get started talking to you about a few specific things that I think are important for us to understand. From my perspective and from our perspective at Harbour Results, what we look at is that there are a few key things going on. There's some macro trends or macro viewpoints, which I'll talk about first, which is frankly where we have a little bit of cause for concern, and I'll talk about why that is. But then from there, I'll go more specifically into more of those micro trends, things that are happening in your backyard or things that affect your businesses. And frankly, that's where things are really good. It's really positive. So we'll talk about this juxtaposition between major headlines from news outlets saying there's some challenges in the economy and the bustling and booming businesses that many of you are in the middle of running and understanding today. So with that, what I'd like to start out is doing a brief overview of what happened in 2021. 2021 was obviously, technically speaking, the same length as all prior years, but was a little long for many people, myself included. There were a lot of things that happened that I want to make sure we're aware of, and I know this is an eye chart, so I don't intend for you to be able to read all of these, but there are some key things, right? We swore in current President Biden back in January. From there, we also had a lot of challenges happen with jobless claims hitting really high levels. We had U.S. unemployment starting to fall, but being a little bit stagnant for a period of time. We also saw the Biden administration release the infrastructure bill that was a huge topic of conversation throughout the year last year. In August, we also had the Bureau of Economic Research actually declare what happened in 2020 as a recession. So that didn't happen until August of 2021. All of these things put together, my intention behind just starting out with this is that a lot of things happened throughout 2021. And beyond that, we have to understand how those things are playing into what's going on today and what 2022 will look like. So with that, what I'd like to do is start out with some of the macroeconomic indicators that we're seeing in the US and the North American economy. Now, I'm not going to stand up here and talk to you about every single economic indicator out there. Frankly, some of you might fall asleep on me. But what I would like to do is touch on the key things that actually affect your businesses and affect your bottom lines. First, we have some good things. Some of the good things are low interest rates, but that's obviously a short-term thing. We've already had many announcements that we'll have at least 3 interest rate hikes this year, maybe more than that. So we got to watch that one closely. It may swiftly go into the bad sign side of things, no longer in the good. We have sustainable GDP growth today, although that one is a little bit concerning, and we'll talk about that more going forward. We've got consistent housing starts. Those of you who have bought a house, I'm sorry, you probably lost a little bit of money, and for those of you who have sold a house, you're probably sitting in a pretty good position. Beyond that, we have strong durable goods demand, and we have consumers who continued spending money throughout all of the challenges that we faced over the last 2 years. Beyond that, we also have some bad signs, so some things that I get a little bit more heartburn about, if you will. We have growing inflation. For a period of time last year, a lot of economists said it's transitory, so it's going away. No one's saying that anymore. It's not going to go away anytime soon. We also have a flat unemployment rate. We have some people who are still concerned to go back to work, or some people who feel like they don't have to go back to work because of some of the additional money that they got last year and the year before that. We also have a high federal debt level. I'm not going to go into too much detail on this, but I think it's something we're all aware of, and it absolutely changes the monetary policy as we go into the new year. We don't have additional stimulus coming out today. That could change, but for the most part, we're sitting in a situation where we're not looking at that additional stimulus. And we still have people filing for a lot of jobless claims. We still have a lot of people who are filing for these unemployment and jobless claims and aren't going back to work, when to the same token, many of you will tell me and have told me that you have huge issues finding people to work in your facilities. So we have a little bit of a double-edged sword here. My parting shot to you on this slide, and then I'll go into some more specifics of some things that affect your businesses, is that from my perspective and our perspective at Harbour, the US economy is slightly less than fine. Now, I don't want this to cause concern to those of you in this virtual room, but my reason for saying that is because the overall economy isn't sitting in a great position, but demand for the goods you make is wonderful. So that's the juxtaposition that we'll explore as we go through this afternoon's presentation. With that, one of the biggest things that I want to make sure that we address as we talk about these macroeconomic forces is what's happening from a labor perspective. Absolutely, you guys are having huge labor challenges, but what I want to call attention to is if we look at overall employment in the US versus looking more specifically at what's happening in the manufacturing industry. So in the overall country, what we saw over the last 2 years is that we had about a 16% drop in overall employed persons from March to April of 2020. And overall, if we look more like today's time frame, we're down about 3.5 million employees on a US perspective. But if I tell you the story about manufacturing, it's a very different story. If we look more specifically about the manufacturing industry, what we see is that we only had an 11% drop from March to April of 2020 in terms of total employed persons. And today we're only down about 400,000 people. And those are people employed in the manufacturing space. To juxtapose that comment, the other thing that we have is about 900,000 open positions in manufacturing today. So what this tells me, and the reason why you see the headline here that the labor market challenge isn't new, is because even if you're able to get back every single employee that you employed before COVID started, you would still have 400,000 open positions as an industry today. So then that begs the question, why is that? The reason why that happened is because of durable goods demand in this country. We saw a 37% increase over the same time frame in overall durable goods demand. So it's not just that you guys are having a labor problem because you can't get back the people you had before COVID, but you need more people because at the end of the day, you're manufacturing pieces, parts, machines, whatever it may be, in order to supply to this durable goods demand, which has had a huge increase. So what this tells me is that this labor market challenge is absolutely here to stay, but it's one that we have to get more creative as we work to solve and hire more people, but it's not new. And it's also unfortunately not going to go away when COVID does continue to work itself out. There is one thing that's a little bit newer, but I'm not going to say it's new, so that's why you have the portion of that word in parentheses. We do have a generational shift that's a little bit newer. It's something that's changing more rapidly than that labor problem, which has been around for a while. If you look overall at the breakdown of people in this country, what you can see is that we have people sitting in a lot of different generations at this point in time. Now there's 3 key things that I want to make sure you look at when you look at this chart. The first one is whenever anybody puts a chart in front of you that looks like this, read the fine print. Because technically, if you look at this chart high level, you can see that Gen Z is bigger than any other generation I'm putting on the slide right now. But Gen Z also has the largest number of years associated with it. So of course it's the largest generation. That doesn't mean that this information should be discredited, but understand when someone says, well, the Gen Z population is the largest one in history, what that really means. Beyond that, there's a couple other things that you should look at and you should understand when you see this chart. The next piece is that this means that there's a new employee base in town. If your businesses aren't doing a good job of hiring millennials and hiring Gen Zs, that's a huge portion of today's labor force. Now, I'm not suggesting they have to be all your senior leaders and senior executives in your business yet, but you got to make sure you get them in and you can cultivate them into those leaders and develop them as they continue to work in your facilities. My parting shot to you on this slide specifically is that we also need to make sure we understand that this means there's a new consumer in town. We have new people that are looking at things and demanding different goods than maybe someone from the silent generation or even a baby boomer would request. So overall, these are 2 of the key things that are absolutely affecting most of your businesses. Beyond that, there's a lot of other factors at play that I'm not going to go into because that would take quite a while. But there's many other things that have both positive and negative implications on all of your businesses that we're seeing happen as we go throughout 2021 and into 2022. We have some really great things like manufacturing sentiment. OEMs are extremely profitable. We've got a lot of reshoring occurring, and we absolutely have good demand levels. We also have some things that are in this phrase that I call Goldilocks. What I mean by Goldilocks is it's not too hot and it's not too cold. If you haven't heard that saying before, then I encourage you to go read a book. There's one specifically I have in mind. But my point to you here is that there's some things that are in this okay situation. We have the infrastructure bill, which may have positive benefits on North American manufacturing, but there's still a lot of things happening from a scaling back perspective there. We also have extreme challenges in manufacturing labor. Obviously, the cost of doing business is going up. We absolutely have increased taxes. We have trucking costs. We have shipping challenges. I'm sure all of you could name a whole list of things that are going on from a supply chain perspective that are all challenges in your business today. So I don't want to minimize those things as I talk to you more specifically about some of the micro viewpoint or things that are affecting your business that I frankly think are really positive. So what I want to do now is shift us more specifically into what I call things that are happening in your neighborhood or things that are happening in your backyard. This is where things are really positive, and this is where we're going to further explore that juxtaposition that I can stand in front of you or stand on a screen in front of you and tell you that I absolutely have concerns about the macro economy, but I'm very bullish and very excited about what this demand does for all of your businesses and the future of your businesses. So with that, the first thing that I want to address is more specifically why this demand that I showed you earlier feels like such a slingshot. There are a few key reasons for it. The big piece of it is that there are a lot of things that over the last 2 years we didn't do. We didn't have big family vacations. We weren't taking lavish vacations, much to my dismay. We weren't going out to restaurants all the time. We weren't even getting elective surgeries, and we weren't going to a lot of sporting events. So what this did, if you understand the chart behind me and look at services versus durable goods, is US consumers and consumers around the globe flipped spending habits on their head. Historically, we've always spent substantially more money on services than we do on durable goods. Now, we're inherently still spending more money on services today. This scale is showing you that difference, but it's at a much lesser rate because we're absolutely increasing that spend on durable goods. So if I look at the same general time frame and understand the growth, there's two pieces of good news here. The first one is if you compare 2019 to 2021, services have actually grown by 3.4%. So for a while in 2020 and into 2021, we were making up for lost time, if you will. We were growing services spend, but we still weren't back up to pre-COVID levels. We've now exceeded those pre-COVID levels, which tells me that people absolutely are spending. We've seen evidence that people are going back and doing more elective surgeries. Obviously, people are buying cars, people are renovating their homes, things of that nature. But the more staggering number here is that durable goods demand has gone up by this 31% point, or that nearly a third portion that we talked about earlier. So what this means is that rather than just making up for lost time, we've built on top of all of this. And that's why, as one of our employees at HRI pointed out, this feels like such a slingshot because you were catapulted into this situation of supplying to this market that's never had this level of growth in that short of a period of time before. But the important thing to call your attention to as we talk about durable goods is that durable goods only are a portion of the total gross domestic product, or GDP, that's in this country. So durable goods demand accounts for about 9% of total US GDP. Beyond that, we have non-durable goods, we have services, we have business investment, government, and then we have a little bit of a decrease in here because of import-export, so that net difference. But what this data shows me is that for the most part, about 25% of US GDP today is really healthy. I'm confident about it and its stability and its consistency to grow. But the exciting part about this is that 25% is driven almost exclusively by that durable goods demand. So it's all the things that you guys are making pieces, making parts, assembling, making supplies for, whatever it may be, that you are the ones that are seeing these increases, and you're the ones that's feeling the benefit of this healthy GDP when we look specifically at durable goods demand. So what I'd like to do now as we kind of explore this durable goods demand piece of it is talk to you a little bit about who this consumer is that's buying these goods. Because in order for me to end this presentation with telling you where I think we're going, and as Sean said, I'll share a little about where we think that is, we've got to understand who's spending the money today and what they're spending it on. So that begs a series of questions. So the first question that I asked myself when going through this was, all right, so where is the money? We have to have money in order to buy goods. It's a logical connection. So what you can see here is that for the most part, the money is pretty well spread out, if you will, when we go all the way from under $15,000 per year to $200,000 and over, with the highest number of earners sitting in the $50,000 to $75,000 and the $100,000 to $150,000. Now, my caution to you is that this data is not stagnant. This data changes every year, every day, every month, whatever it may be. But this is overall where we're sitting in terms of household income distribution today. So then what that does is that drives me to my next question, which is, all right, so I get where the money is, but not everybody is buying the goods that I make or that my product ends up helping to make at the end of the day. So the question becomes, who does buy those goods? So if we look at a series of different industries, the top 40% of earners account for 51% of healthcare spend and 73% of leisure and hospitality spend. So what that tells me is that the top 40% of earners are driving most of the spending from a medical and an aerospace and things of that nature perspective. If we also look at average household income of a car buyer is $75,000. Average household income of a homeowner is $95,000. So if I bring back that chart that I showed you on the prior slide, what this shows you and what this tells me is that generally your end consumer is people making more than $75,000 a year. Because people making less than that likely are not as insulated from external economic forces to be able to consistently buy or lease new cars or go buy a new home or go buy a boat because they're near a lake, whatever the situation may be. So this group is the group that we're going to refer to as your end consumer for the next couple slides. And the reason for that is because as we consider all these external forces that occur, I believe that this group will continue spending money and continue buying those goods that you guys help to make. So with that, this begs a couple more questions, and I apologize, you're getting a little bit of a glimpse into how my brain works and the questions that I ask myself. But what you can see here is my next question was, okay, so I get it, I understand this is my end consumer group, but is this group growing? The short answer here is yes, this group is absolutely growing. So what you're looking at here is that the only group that's growing when we look at breakdowns of overall household income is the group that's making over $75,000 a year. So that group has gone from about 39-40% in 2014 to about 46% of the total population in 2020. Unfortunately, 2021 data isn't out yet, or else I would share that number with you too. The two other groups, so that $25,000 to $75,000 and the less than $25,000 group, are both decreasing. So this is a very positive sign when we think about it from durable goods demand perspective, right? The group that buys the goods that you ultimately make is also the group that's growing in terms of percentage of total population. Great news means more people buy goods. The unintended consequence here that we have to be aware of is that that group that's making $25,000 to $75,000 a year is declining. For many of you, that's also a lot of your hourly staff. They're making in this range of income. So your pool of potential people to hire from that are willing to take 14, 15, 18 bucks an hour is decreasing. So there's always a good and a bad, especially when we look at these economic forces, which I know might make it a little bit more complicated, but I want to make sure we always understand both sides of the scenario. So the next question within that I ask myself is, okay, so I get it, the group's growing, but who's in this group? What is the demographic of the people that are buying the goods that I make? The short answer here is that this is a wide range of people from an age perspective. We have people ranging anywhere from 25, all the way up to about 64 years old. This tells me a couple key things. Number one, this is a lot of challenges for your end user or for your OEMs that you're supplying to. They're selling to a wide range of people. I can tell you firsthand that I want something very different than my mom or dad want. And yet the OEMs that you're working with have to make sure that they're able to sell to both those groups of people. Beyond that, the other thing we can consider while looking at this data is that the largest group today behind our under 15-year-olds are people sitting in the 25 to 34-year-old range. They're sitting at about 14% of the total US population today. Now I understand that $70,000 is slightly less than this number I defined to you before of $75,000 in terms of your end consumer group. But what I would caution you to think about is that this group that's 25 to 34 years old is already starting to buy the goods you make, and they haven't even hit their peak earning potential yet. If you look at a lot of different studies and data sets, what you'll see is that on average, the largest year-over-year growth from an income perspective for an individual happens from 35 to 45 years old. So this group is already starting to buy the goods you make, and they have at least, likely more, but at least 10 solid years of earning at higher rates than they had before. And you guys guessed it, when you're earning at higher rates than you are before, you're spending more money on things like a new car, like a boat, like a new dishwasher that talks to you. I don't know what it is anymore, but whatever it may be. So what this is telling me is that overall we're sitting in a very positive situation for potential future growth. Now, as I said to you before, there's always a good and a bad, so I do want to make sure we're aware of some of those macro factors we talked about before and the effect that they have on this group. We absolutely could have what I'm terming a normal recession. Now, that is not a technical term, but what I mean by that is recessions inherently aren't actually that bad for us. We live in a cyclical economy. We need recessions to relieve pressure in our overall economy and make sure that we're not growing at too high of a rate or whatever the situation may be. So what I mean is that we may have a normal recession to allow us to relieve some of that pressure, and frankly, I don't think most of this group will be overly affected because they have enough money and their earning potentials are going up to continue buying the goods you make, even if there is a normal recession, not what happened in 2008 and 2009. Beyond that, we have to watch the cost of money closely. These interest rate hikes are very important for us to understand. It means the cost of money is going to be more than it used to be. So some people may choose to borrow at a lesser rate. But generally speaking, I do also have a lot of this end user group who's doing a great job of consistently earning more money every year and asking for more money. So what that means is that they'll likely still be able to borrow even with higher interest rates. We got to watch inflation. I'm not going to go into too much more detail on this one, but you guys as employers have to understand that your employees are facing inflation challenges. It's costing them more money to buy milk, to buy gasoline, whatever the situation may be, and that may affect whether or not they ask you for more money as your boss. The last couple things are buying patterns. We do need to understand that working from home or going into the office or moving out of big city does affect buying patterns. So some people may change what they're buying a little bit as we go back into more people going into the office and things of that nature. Credit usage is an area that we've gotten ourselves in big trouble with before. For those of you who are watching this stuff in 2008 and 2009, we were spending way too much money on credit cards and it was a little bit of a scary situation. For the most part today, we're sitting in a good position when it comes to credit usage. So that's a positive spot for us to be in. The last piece is very important, right? So we have this argument around the lifetime of goods. The consensus behind it is it would be, frankly, annoying, bad for the environment, and just not financially sound for me to buy a new dishwasher every single year. I don't want to deal with the guy coming into my house to replace the new dishwasher every year. I don't want to deal with figuring out how to run a new one, whether or not the dryer works, all of these different things, right? So for the most part, you can say the argument that, okay, Cara, I get that these people are buying things, but they're not going to keep buying them every year. They're going to take breaks when they buy durable goods. That's how durable goods work. I agree with you, but the difference we have today goes back to that generational shift chart that I showed you quite a while ago now. When you think back to the generational shift, we have this huge portion of the population who hasn't started buying these goods yet. So they're all going to be first-time buyers. They're going to buy their first nice car after driving their dad's old Buick all through college. They're going to buy their first house and they're going to want a second refrigerator in the basement. They're going to go and get an elective surgery that maybe they wouldn't have done when they were younger, whatever the situation may be. So overall, these macro factors are very real and I want us to be aware of them, but I don't think they'll have too detrimental effect on this group because this group is insulated from some of these challenges. My parting shot to you before I go into the opportunity, or what I call this forecast, is the final question you got to ask yourself is, okay, I get it. They're growing, they're in a good spot, they're making money. Do they have too much debt to buy the goods I make? The short answer here is I don't think they do, but it's important to watch this closely because debt is something that consistently grows in this country. I've split out debt, aggregate debt, into 5 major categories. The 2 I want to call your attention to the most are what's happening from a student loan and an automotive perspective. Both student loans and automotive debt have doubled over the last 11 years. From an automotive perspective, I'm a bit okay with this because it's spread out over a large group of people, and we all know that the cost of a car is going up. We have higher lease rates than we did before. We have a very old average age of a vehicle. So overall, we're seeing people increase their debt in the auto industry. The one that concerns me a little bit more is what's happening from a student loan perspective. Student loans have also doubled. The reason why this concerns me more is because, yes, this is aggregate student loan debt, but remember, it's clustered in a smaller subset of the population. People who graduated college 30 years ago don't have student debt the same way that someone who graduated college 10 years ago and paid $50,000 a year for their education have debt. So this is something to watch closely and make sure that this group that is graduating college, and a lot of them with debt, are able to continue buying these durable goods that we all make and we all care about the demand for. My parting shot to you is housing. Housing debt has absolutely increased a little bit. Obviously, housing was a big part of the conversation back in 2008 and 2009. Based off everything that we're looking at today, the housing market is still really healthy. We're doing a better job of having more supply of homes. The pricing is getting a little bit better. I'm not suggesting it's great, but we're sitting in a better position and we don't have a bubble. This isn't going to burst and we're going to see a bust in the housing industry specifically. Rather, we'll likely continue at this pace for a significant period of time. So with that, what I'd like to end with today and talk to you guys about for the last couple minutes is what's happening from a demand forecast perspective. This is what I like to call the opportunity. This is, from my perspective, the exciting part. This is where we can talk about what we think is really good and what's going to be beneficial for your businesses in the future. So then the first question becomes, okay, is this demand sustainable? You've talked to me about who's buying the goods that I make. I get that. You've talked to me about these macro forces, but if this isn't sustainable going forward, it's not beneficial to my business. Our answer to this question as an organization, and I've talked with many other economists about this, is yes, this demand is absolutely sustainable. And there are some key reasons why we think that. We understand why we were slingshotted into this level of demand. So we can explain it, we can understand why it happened. We have an end consumer group that's growing. We have macro concerns that aren't going to affect this group. We have manageable levels of debt. We have new demand drivers that are coming, new people buying vehicles and buying homes and things of that nature. And we have a lot of these key drivers for demand that are extremely healthy. So from my perspective, I absolutely think that demand is sustainable. But as in the words of a true consultant would say, it's a yes, but scenario. Yes, it is absolutely sustainable, but it's not sustainable at the rate that we've been feeling for the last 18 months. And frankly, I think that's okay, because many of you have told me that you've gotten gray hairs or you've pulled your hair out over the last 18 months trying to run your businesses through these ongoing supply chain challenges and ongoing increases in demand. So from my perspective, what I would tell you is that sustainable means something a little bit more like this. So what you can see as that dotted line comes onto the screen is that I'm normalizing some of the noise that happened over the last 20 years, and we will likely have consistent and sustainable growth going forward. We're not going to have 30% increases over the course of 12 months. That's just crazy. But what we will have is ongoing sustainable growth. Now, it's not going to be as pretty as this picture is. You guys know I normalized all the noise, and that's not realistic. But overall, for us to look at it going forward, I really think we're sitting in a positive situation. So with that, there are some key industries that we can address this in and we can understand what their growth forecasts are. So if you look at manufacturing in the US for these industries, what you're looking at is on the left-hand side of each of these boxes, you have their growth from 2019 to 2021. And on the right-hand side, you have growth from 2021 to 2025. So the first piece of good news on here is that every single orange arrow is going up. So every single one of these industries is forecasting increased manufacturing revenue from 2021 to 2025, which inherently means that many of you will have more business and will see more demand as you go forward into the new year. Even from 2019 to 2021, we had some industries that were still growing, so overall still a positive sign. And the most exciting piece of news, at least from my perspective on this slide, is if you look at the two industries that are growing the most, medical device and aerospace, those are also the two largest industries. Aerospace manufacturing is over a $200 billion industry in the US market alone today, and medical device is about a $50 billion industry. So these two industries absolutely have a huge amount of growth, and they have a huge supply base that many of you are working with. So this is really a good sign, and hopefully this is that positive news that I'm leaving you with. But as I think is becoming the theme of this presentation and many that our organization have been giving lately, there's always two sides to the coin. Yes, I'm putting a very positive picture out there from a demand perspective and it's really exciting, but there's still work to do. We can't kid ourselves. It doesn't mean that the business is just going to come to us. The first thing is you still have to go get the work. There's still a big supply base out there. There's a lot of people who are supplying. So at the end of the day, you still have to be competitive. You still have to have hunters on your team, and you got to make sure you're looking at the right avenues to get the business. We've got to be realistic that these supply chain challenges aren't going anywhere. I would love to stand up here and tell all of you that I think they're going to be solved in 6 months, but that's just not true. We will likely have ongoing supply chain challenges throughout the rest of this year and going into next year. But I think the good news here is at this point, we've already had supply chain challenges for about a year, and you guys are still running profitable, good businesses. So we just have to continue with this improvement and understanding of how we run our businesses through this noise rather than waiting for it to end. Some of your customers are going to fare better than others, so it's always important to understand the financial stability of your customers. I encourage you to continue doing that as we go into this new year. Make sure they're sitting in good positions, make sure they're paying you on time, things of that nature. This demand will still be volatile. As I said to you, I normalized the noise, so there will still be some volatility, there'll be some up months and some down months, but as always, if you can string those 4 good quarters together, you're gonna have a highly profitable year as a business. This labor problem isn't going anywhere. I think we've got to get much more creative in what we're doing from a labor perspective. There's a lot of encouragement for you to link what's happening in marketing and what's happening in HR, because at the end of the day, you're selling products, but you're also selling people the opportunity to come work for your organization. So we've got to continue getting more creative about that. And the last piece, guys, this inflation thing that I'll talk about one more time, is that these costs are going up. They're going up because they can, and they will continue to. We have to make sure we're aware of that for 2 reasons. Number 1, your employee base is feeling that. And number 2, you guys are feeling that as you buy material and buy products. So with that, I always encourage you to continue taking a step back and saying, okay, what am I gonna do? How am I gonna make my business better and do this work that I have to do and manage through all of this noise? So as I promised Sean and the team at Makino, I told him I would leave you guys with one slide that just says, okay, so that was a lot of information, but what should I actually be watching? Because there's no way I can stand up here and expect all of you to watch every single indice that I just went through. So what I would tell you is that you need to be watching these 5 key things. A big one is the employment rate. We've got to understand what's happening from an unemployment perspective, but more importantly, we have to understand what's happening from a labor force participation perspective. So if people are not in the labor force, they're also not in your unemployment number. So sometimes your best opportunity today is to find someone who's not even considering a job, who maybe is a stay-at-home mom who has kids who are getting older, and saying, hey, I want that person to come and work for me, and you're pulling them out of that labor pool completely. Beyond that, you gotta watch consumer spending and consumer debt. If people spend too much money and rack up too much debt, they'll be less likely to continue buying the goods that your products help to make. But for the most part right now, we're sitting in an okay situation. We ran through some of that data today. I need you guys to watch inflation and interest rates closely. Inflation is important because, as a speaker at an event I was at last year told me, you are, as an owner of a business or as a president or as a director and a leader, in some ways the financial planner or the financial advisor for your employees. The reason why I bring that to your attention is because if you as an owner and a leader are facing $350 at the pump, or you're facing $5,000 more for a vehicle, 5% more for a house, whatever the situation may be, you've got to acknowledge that your employees are also feeling these challenges. So you've got to make sure that you're increasing at the cost of living adjustment, if not more than it, and ensure you understand that if your employees are going to leave, we've got to make sure that we're doing our best to circumvent that inflation challenge that they're all facing so that they stay with your business and you minimize turnover, rather than going to someone else down the road that will pay them a little bit more money. Similarly with interest rates, 2 things here. You got to understand the effect it has on your employees and your labor pool, but also if you're planning on borrowing money, I would encourage you to think about that in the near future, because these interest rate hikes are coming and there will be more than one. Beyond that, bank health is always important, right? There's this thing with banks where they absolutely love to loan money, but they're not always going to be nice if you can't necessarily pay that money back at the rate that you need to. So we got to make sure we're understanding how healthy banks are and how healthy the bank that you're working with is. If you're considering switching banks, what does that look like? Make sure you're asking the right questions there to understand what's happening. The last piece is the government deficit and government policy. From a deficit perspective, the deficit and the increase in that debt absolutely changes the value of the US dollar. So for global companies, companies dealing with China, dealing with Europe, you've got to understand what that government deficit is doing and how it's decreasing the value of the US dollar today. Beyond that, we also have to understand how these government policies will affect our businesses. The infrastructure bill may be positive for your business, but you got to make sure that you're focusing on the right things and landing the right business. We have to understand how all these ongoing policies will affect our bottom lines. So that's something to watch closely. With that, I would just like to leave you with 2 more slides, one of them being a thank you to all of our partners. We couldn't do what we do without AFS, which is the Auto Forecast Solutions company, and more importantly, we couldn't do what we do without partners like Makino. They absolutely allow us to get messages out there and to make sure that we're promoting them while also promoting excellence in North American manufacturing, because that's what we all want. So with that, thank you to all our partners. This is my email address. Sean also has my phone number, so you guys can absolutely call me and reach out to me with questions. It's been an exciting opportunity to talk to all of you, and I really appreciate the attention today.